Hi everyone, welcome back. If you're growing your own food, especially in a greenhouse environment, it's very important to start from seed. If you purchase seedlings from a nursery, they often come with pests and diseases, and you don't know if they were treated with any pesticides or herbicides prior to you picking them up. Starting from seed will help you save money, it will give you a larger variety than you would get in a nursery, and it will help you ensure the growing conditions throughout the process. It also gives you the satisfaction of starting from a little tiny seed and growing into bountiful fruits and vegetables. Let's get started. First things first. How do we decide where to source our seeds and what varieties to plant? Heirloom varieties are often passed down from generation to generation for their desirable characteristics, but they can be more susceptible to diseases. Hybrid seeds are bred specifically for disease resistance and also pest resistance. Both of these types of seeds are open pollinated, meaning they're pollinated naturally by either bees or wind. If you desire to save your seeds and you're specifically looking for an heirloom variety, it's important that you only plant that one variety in your greenhouse. Because if you plant a certain type of tomato on one side of your greenhouse and another on the other side of your greenhouse, and they happen to be cross-pollinated, you will end up with a hybrid seed. It's not necessarily bad, but it won't have the exact characteristics of that original heirloom variety. There are also greenhouse-specific seeds that are bred for both disease resistance and pest resistance, specifically in greenhouse environments. Some of our favorite seed companies include Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds, Johnny Selected Seeds, and Botanical Interests. Thanks, Eric. There are many seed companies out there, and it's really your personal preference as to which you choose. We just prefer to source organic and therefore non-GMO seeds. Most importantly, pick varieties that you know that you are going to eat, and make sure to incorporate some flowers to help attract pollinators. When do we start our seeds? In a growing dome, we have a 365-day growing season, meaning that we're planting seeds all year long. We like to practice succession planting, meaning that we have new seedlings ready to go as fully established plants are being harvested. This allows us to have a continual supply of fresh produce. As a general rule of thumb, we like to start our cold-hardy crops between August and October, while we still have enough daylight and warmth for those seeds to germinate. These are seeds like brassicas, alliums, leafy greens, and herbs. We like to start our really warm-loving crops like tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants between February and April. If you're growing in a growing dome or a greenhouse environment, you can use the indoor seed starting guidelines on the back of your seed packets. The growing dome does create various microclimates throughout the dome, so you do have a little bit more flexibility with what you can grow throughout the year. The growing dome has 4 main zones: Eastern, Western, Southern, and Central. Each one of these zones creates a microclimate within the growing dome. The East gets early morning sun and is usually the coolest. The South gets the most sun throughout the day and experiences the most extreme temperatures. It's going to be the warmest in the summer and the coolest in the winter. The West gets the most afternoon sun. The Central Zone has the most temperate climate. It is closest to the above-ground pond and will be warmest in the winter and coolest in the summer. Vents and fans add another layer to the ecosystem, as certain plants benefit from additional airflow. It's also important to keep in mind the size and spacing requirements of your plants at maturity. Plants that grow tall, such as indeterminate tomatoes, cucumbers, peas, whole beans, are all going to cast shade on the plants below them. Therefore, you can plant cool weather crops such as lettuce and root vegetables during the summer months because your taller plants are going to help shade and make the soil cooler. The growing dome was designed to create a Mediterranean climate, meaning it has cool, wet winters and warm, dry summers. We particularly like fig trees in our larger domes because in the summertime they have large leaves that help to cast shade on the plants below, and in the wintertime they lose those leaves, allowing for maximum solar exposure to the above-ground pond. What do we need for seed starting? This really depends on if we're going to be direct sowing our seeds or if we're going to sow our seeds in trays to transplant later. We're going to start with the trays first. So what we're going to need is a seed starting tray and the cell inserts or larger small pots. So we're going to start with our seed starting mix. And this is typically sterile, so you can go ahead and add some worm castings into this. And I personally like to add a little bit of a seed starting mix to kind of help things along. So I add this BioLive product. Well, we've already got everything pre-mixed here. So I'm going to put my gloves on and we're going to fill some of these cells. One thing that's important is that this mixture is moist. You don't want it to be too wet, but you could tell that if I squish it together, it does stay together. We're gonna take our cell and fill it up. We don't want to compact it too much, but we do want it to be firmly in there. And just smooth it out so everything is nice and even. And then we're ready to plant. There are a few different sizes of inserts and pots that we're going to be using. So these smaller ones, we are going to be putting our leafy greens into. These medium-sized ones, we're going to be putting our brassicas into. These would also be good for peppers, tomatoes, and eggplants. And then these larger pots, we are going to put our flowers in, and we are putting our flowers directly into a potting mix and not into a seed starting mix. Depending on the time of year that you're starting your seeds, you might find a grow light helpful, which is one of the benefits of starting plants in trays. Before we start planting, I like to make sure that I have plant labels ready to go. That way I remember where I planted what. I always think I'm gonna remember what I planted where, but in 3 weeks, everything kind of looks the same. You can use fancy plant labels, but these are a little excessive for seedlings. So for the average gardener and myself, I like to start off with some popsicle seeds. And I really like popsicles. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start off with our leafy greens and a couple of herbs in our smallest cell inserts. So I'm going to start with cilantro first. I'm going to reference the back of my seed packet, which says that these like a seed depth of 1/2 inch. I'm going to get some seeds out, and you can use your finger. I like to use a little tool. I have this. You could use like the back of a paintbrush or something similar to poke the holes. This just helps me get a better gauge of how deep I'm going. Going to start by poking my holes with the 1/2 inch depth. And then I like to put 2 seeds per cell. That way, if one doesn't germinate, I have a backup. And then we can go back and thin them out later. So now I'm going to take my same little tool or my finger, make sure that the seeds are pushed down 1/2 inch and just cover up the hole, and then we will go on to our next plant. So the last seeds that we're going to be starting in these small pots are going to be flowers. I am going to be starting some nasturtiums, which according to Eric from Epic Gardening say that I should be soaking them in water for 12 to 24 hours before planting. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to plant them directly in the soil. I've done this at home and it works just fine. I am going to be soaking my pea seeds in a little bit of water because I am going to be direct sowing these into the raised beds. Now that we have all of our seeds planted, we're going to go ahead and give them a light watering. Until they have germinated, you want to make sure that you just spray your seeds gently with a little bit of water. Once your seeds have germinated, meaning that they have popped out of the top of the soil, you can go ahead and bottom water them every 2 to 3 days as needed. Germination typically happens between temperatures of 60 and 80 degrees. You want the soil to be moist but not super wet, so keep an eye on it and only do this as you need to. You can also mix in a tablespoon of worm castings into a gallon of water and use this to water your plants once a week or so, just so they have continual nutrients throughout the growth process. You can also incorporate fish emulsion in a similar diluted mixture for your heavy feeders like tomatoes and brassicas. So you'll know your seedlings are ready to transplant once they have 2 sets of true leaves. Honestly, the bigger the plant, the better. So here we have a seedling, and it has 2 cotyledons, which are its little baby leaves. These are what's going to emerge first, so don't let those deceive you. The true leaves are going to look more like the actual leaves of the plant. So this is a Romanesco, and we have 1 set of true leaves here, and then we have another set coming right at the top. So this guy is ready to transplant. So we do need to thin these, which you'll have to do whether you start your seeds in cells or if you direct sow them, because we did plant more than 1 seed in this cell and they both ended up germinating. What I'm going to do is remove this from the pot and try to break them apart gently to save both of these plants, since they do both look pretty healthy. So I have gone ahead and mixed in some compost and worm castings into the top 2 to 3 inches of soil, so everything is nice and soft and we've mixed it all in really well. Now we're going to go ahead and plant our seedlings, and we're going to space these out about a foot apart. So I'm going to do 3 here right in front of our pond. I'm going to make the hole that I'm putting them in about 1 inch larger than the root ball. And pat them in firmly. So I've shown you how I transplant the seedlings for optimal growth. Now I'm going to go ahead and direct sow some carrot seeds right over here in the central bed. When direct sowing, it is important to go ahead and amend your soil before you actually plant your seeds, because you're not going to be able to do so afterwards. So since I'm planting carrots here, I'm going to go ahead and mix in a little bit of bone meal and potash, along with some compost and worm castings into the top 2 to 3 inches of soil. So for carrots and other direct sown crops, you can do this with radishes. You could also do this with lettuces and other things that we did start in those trays earlier. I'm going to go ahead and make a row with my finger using the seed depth that's on the back of my seed packet. And then I'm just going to sprinkle a bunch of seeds in there, and we'll come back and thin them once they've germinated. I'm going to use the same watering methods for the direct sown seeds that I do for the seeds that we started in cells. So I'm going to go ahead and spray these with a little bit of water, lightly, to keep the soil moist. Once they germinate, I will begin watering every 2 to 3 days, and I'll alternate in that worm water solution once a week. If your temperatures are not typically warm enough to germinate, you can utilize a dome such as this, or a row cover to help increase the soil temperature and boost those germination rates. It's important to remember to rotate your crops. If you plant a brassica in a certain area, you may consider planting a legume, some kind of pea or bean, in its place before planting another heavy feeder such as tomatoes. This is because brassicas and tomatoes are both very heavy feeders, and legumes are nitrogen fixers, so they will help to enhance your soil without you needing to amend it so much before the next planting. By rotating your crops, you're going to ensure the best yield throughout the year. Starting plants from seed is both fun and rewarding. Pick out some unique varieties that you would like to grow, find yourself a good compost and some worm castings, and remember to plant with your microclimates and crop rotation in mind. You can use the links in the description of this video for more detailed information. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you soon. Happy growing!